Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, Kathy. How are
Good
you?
morning.
This is End Times Friday, so we have lots to share. The world has lots of signs right now, so
Yes, it does.
we can share about that. It was really fun having Scott and Kristen Cornell from New Hampshire.
Yes, I love having fellow New Hampshire people out
Have
here.
you been over to their new place at all?
I have not seen the new place. No, I've seen it pictures. They sent us the link to see it online when they were first purchasing it. But we haven't been up there yet. I've heard it's just beautiful.
Great. We're going to, we come up, as you know, we come up and do 2 weeks back-to-back retreats up in New Hampshire, coming up here in October. And then,
Right.
should be, sneeze. So then Scott and Kristen got their new house, and they also, I don't know if you knew this, but they have a separate lake house.
Yes, that was all part of the deal, actually.
Oh, it was.
They
Okay.
bought it from the same person.
Oh, is that right? I didn't even know
Yes,
that.
yeah. There's a lot to that story.
Oh, that's
yeah.
cool. So what we're trying to do, which I got to work with Scott and Kristen, but have a few of us in between retreats, maybe go over there for a day or two.
Oh, fun.
And we could have our little mini retreat, that if you and Dan can make it, and other guys up there in New Hampshire could
Oh, that'd be
maybe.
fun.
I know Scott and Kristen would love doing that. So,
Mm-hmm.
but it was sure fun learning about their story and the miraculous stuff that God has done in their life and how they've been used. We talk about God's will. It's like, man, they're having the time of their life.
They are. They have had a grand adventure with this.
They really have.
It's been
and
beautiful
it's
to
been,
hear.
It's been exciting and fun, to learn about that. But as we look at, our discussion, which is again out of Revelation chapter 1, it says, read it, listen to it, and then pay attention to it. That what I'm going to show you through John, everybody needs to know, understand, and follow. So it's really important for us to keep processing this. The way we are doing it is we're not trying to come up with, well, this is exactly what's going to happen and when, and therefore you should. That's
Right.
not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to say is it's very important. We are to understand what the word says, receive what the word says, and by the way, receive what it doesn't say.
Right.
So we don't add to it or make a conjecture about it. And we'll get into this. For example, one of the big questions I always get is, I'd really like to learn this end time stuff, but what I really want to know is, when are we going to get raptured?
Right.
With the thought of, my church has said we're going to get raptured before the tribulation, so really it doesn't matter, which is their position. And when we get into this, we're going to understand that, interesting enough, the word isn't clear on exactly when that happens. It's clear that it happens, but not when it happens.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, and it's
go ahead.
interesting too. I think, in fact, I just was having a conversation with a friend today who is newer in her walk with God. I should say she's walked with God for a while, but really newer in learning to abide.
Yeah.
And so she was asking, and I take for granted, because of the church culture that I grew up in, that everyone has heard all of these things, and she's like, so let me ask you something. I've been spending time with God, and I'm starting to feel these alerts about some of these things that are going on. Do you think God's trying to tell us anything? Do you think this means anything? And so here's what this alerted me to, though, is we cannot take for granted that people understand or know there's even prophecies being fulfilled.
Yes.
Not every, even if they go to church, even if they have been in Bible teaching churches, not everybody is actually preaching or teaching in a way that they actually get to understand what's going on and are truly alerted to it.
Right.
And so that's, that's one of these reasons that these End Times Fridays, I almost called it Good Times Fridays again. End Times Fridays are so important, is to lay the foundation, because it is not being there's a lot of teaching
Yes.
and well intended, but miss, and then there's a lot of just non-teaching going on as well.
Right. That's right. And the the aspect of that, as we've been in a section actually where Jesus said, pay attention to the signs.
Right.
And you appropriately set up the picture of that, and that is birth pangs.
Mm-hmm.
And when the birth occurs, there's a whole protocol of, well, it starts with a contraction,
Mm-hmm.
and then they get more intense, and then they get more frequent, and then the
Yes.
water breaks, and it's like, okay, here we go. And Jesus described it as birth pangs,
Mm-hmm.
which means that the sequence has started.
Right.
And so what we're saying is that we can observe birth pangs.
Yes, absolutely.
And so let's understand them. We can't attach a timeline to that. I know one thing. My interpretation of time is way
Mm-hmm.
different than God's.
Isn't that the truth? Yes, I agree.
And when I say, okay, here it's coming, that could be decades
Right. Right.
before it actually occurs. So I've stopped asking or interpreting. Well, of course, it means
Mm-hmm.
this. God has told me actually very precisely, Rich, stop putting your own timeline on stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't mine. My ways and my thoughts are way different than yours, and my perspective of time is way different than yours.
Mm-hmm.
Just understand it is going to happen, but don't try to lay on your timeline to it.
Right.
So I've tried to work hard at that. But we do see signs, and you and I have talked about them. We went through a litany of them last two times, about Israel being returning as a nation,
Mm-hmm.
earthquakes, trouble, etc. Well, just recently, what's happened over this last couple of weeks is a major earthquake in Haiti.
Yes.
It was 7.2. It killed over 1,500 at the moment.
And
60
the count's still climbing. Yeah.
60,000 are injured. Right behind it, by the way, is a tropical storm that has hit them to cause them even more difficulty. So, the issue of trouble. Interesting enough, and this is, again, and you even said you didn't hear this reported, but on the very same day is 3 volcanoes erupted anew
Right.
in Alaska.
I had no idea. I did not hear that
Yeah,
report. Yeah.
and that's a major thing, because actually the
Mm-hmm.
scriptures talk about earthquakes and volcanoes, and well, that happened on the same day, and there were 3 of them that erupted at the same time, and they're they're getting more powerful right now, and these are brand new occurrences. So that's going on. So we're having lots of interesting
Mm-hmm.
signs and things happen of what, and then when it comes down to trouble, trouble is particularly in the scriptures is around economic complications and trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the a couple things is that the fear of recession in America and then worldwide, and what they do, Kathy, is they have actually measurements of questions,
Right.
and every month they go out and they ask a sampling.
Mm-hmm.
What's your perspective on the economy? And
Right.
there's more refined than that, but it's basically that's what they do, and it's called the consumer sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
And when things are expected to go well, that it rises.
Right.
When it's expected to go poorly or worse, it lowers.
Right.
And then they
And
measure.
it was on the rise.
It was on the
for
rise.
several months.
And they measure the difference, and then really make a conclusion about that. Well, and by the way, one thing that I studied when I went to grad school was macroeconomics. And we got into this very lengthy education about how the economy works. But one thing that drives it is called self-fulfilling prophecy. So that if you believe things are going to go well, then you spend and invest, which, by the way, promotes
things going well.
Going
it spurs
well,
the economy.
and it spurs the economy because there's a thing that's called the multiplier effect. And that is, if you go out and you buy something that you normally would have not bought, because, well, I'm going to save that money as opposed to spend that money.
Right.
Well, you go buy something, well, that had that store, sell it to you, and somebody had to manufacture that and distribute it and get it to you. Well, that all takes people. So the more that you do that, the more employment then expands, and people spend money expanding the employment, and the economy does really well. It happens on the opposite side. So if you say, I'm not going to buy that house, I'm not going to buy that car, I'm not going to buy that stuff as much, well, it contracts. And when it contracts, then other people get affected, and they say, well, then I'm not going to spend as much, and I'm going to contract. And so the depth of what's called the recession is determined by that sentiment.
Right.
How deep is it going to go? Well, they just came out this last week with the new sentiment, and it was a dramatic shift to the negative.
Right.
And they were alarmed by it. They're like, oh, and
really attributing it to the Delta variant and people thinking lockdowns are coming again.
That this could be a problem, and we're not sure about, and inflation, and all these things we've talked about. So the issue about that is we're in another phase of what I call trouble. Is that probably not going to be like we thought, and economically there could be an impact to us in terms of our jobs and income and et cetera. So we're just adding all these up, that these are signs that we get to see in real time. Now, by the way, we have to, again, keep asking God about those, because consumer sentiment and recession doesn't itself signal the end is here.
Right.
Because, well, that's been happening throughout history. And the truth is, what do people think about the economy? If they think good, it's going to rise. If they think poorly, it's going to shrink. It doesn't per se. It's just another interesting factor of, on top of that, is the trouble going to become so severe or so problematic that it does usher in the end time? Because here's why, and here's why I'm saying this. When the tribulation comes, and remember, the tribulation is a 7-year period.
Right.
It's that last week of Daniel that we've described. And it's broken into two pieces. What's called the first 3.5 years and the second 3.5 years. The first 3.5 years, the beast, the new economic system, the one world government, the new currency is all set up, and actually, on the surface, the people that join it actually do very well.
Right. And there is the perception of prosperity in those first 3.5 years.
Yes,
correct?
yes, and wealth building, and everything is, hey, isn't this great? Now, the last 3.5 years, when the Antichrist has now been understood, by the way, he comes out of the beast, which we'll talk about again. So it's not that he's not actually in power when things start. He gets into power during the first 3.5 years, and people willingly accept it.
Right.
And when he says, I'm God, the abomination of desolation, which we've talked about, and the whole world, you need to worship me. That's when God brings his wrath against the world. And there's 3.5 years of really awful stuff that happens, and all the wealth is gone, et cetera, et cetera. Interesting enough, they don't see it as, I guess we were wrong. They just think, well, we got to get rid of Israel and their God, because that's the problem. And again, and we'll talk about this actually today. What's good is evil, and evil's been good, and it flipped. So that's all going to happen. So the impact of the trouble is all of that occurs because of a worldwide collapse in the economy.
Right.
So it goes to a deep, 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 severe consequences where people literally are going to have a hard time buying food. And things are going to get really awful. I personally, because of the way that the nature of the human has become, their tolerance is so low now. You know, I remember my grandma. I did a Johnny Carson interview on video with her. I said, you know, you just sit there, and I'm going to ask you about your life and what was it like and how did it happen. So I got all that on tape.
Oh, what a great thing to have.
And I got it all on tape, and I just let it kind of go where it went and where she went, and hey, tell me more about that and how did that. And she always was, and during that time she was hilarious. Because of you know, and to just give an example, she's her parents are German, moved to Iowa on a farm.
Okay.
So she's 16 years old, and she says, I am not going to be a farmer. She gets on a train and goes to Chicago.
Oh, you're kidding.
And she just went. I'm going to Chicago, no money. Nothing. I'm just going to Chicago. And she gets on a train, goes to Chicago. And she winds up immediately getting a job at Marshall Field's, which is a famous department store that now was bought by Macy's, but is a big store on State Street. And she winds up immediately getting a job, winds up being the supervisor of the millinery department. And she talks in this interview about waiting on Mary Pickford, the actress, and all these actresses that would come in, and her relationship with her. And she came in and always had her bring her clothes and try on clothes. And one time she brought all this stuff to Mary Pickford, and you know, she was happy about it. And she says to, you know, my grandma, her name's Pauline, hey, Pauline, you pick what you want out of that rack, and I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to give it to you, you know. And so she shared about that kind of stuff. But she talked about the Depression, and their viewpoint of the Depression and how it went, and how they got together, and you know, they didn't get crushed, and they understood this was not going to be a short-term deal, and how they made it through that. I think that they had a different resolve, and that the people of our age, we have a very short resolve.
Right.
I don't think we can put up with the pain, the difference of our economic life very long. And so my prediction is that the collapse doesn't last long. It's not a multi-year thing. I think it's months. And because of that, when they come through with the solution, okay, by the way, yes, you're going to stop being an American. We're going to have this one world government, and we're going to,
people will embrace it.
You're not going to have a federal election about because you're no longer going to have a president. It's going to look like this. And it'll be one world government operating the whole world, that everybody will say, sure. Absolutely, because it comes out of the collapse. So when we talk about economic problems as a sign, the sign itself, you know, like the sentiment, that's not a sign per se. It's just the question is that indicating, Father, something deeper that we need to pay attention about? And so with that, that one particularly, and the same thing with the earthquakes and the volcanoes and all that. It's well, I'm on alert.
Right.
It's like, this is something that we can point to and say, is this indicating something deeper?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll know and he said, watch the signs.
Mm-hmm.
But watching is, okay, I see it. Could you show me more?
Right.
And that's going to be, to me, that's the fun of even considering the end of, well, that's interesting. So tell me more about it. So it'll be fun to, pursue that a little bit as we understand the signs. And of course, you've seen the signs as well. So
Yeah, we are living in a fascinating time,
yeah.
you know.
One thing as he talks about the signs, there's a statement that he makes out of Luke about how to make sure we live. So go to Luke 21, read verses 34 through 38.
But watch yourselves, lest your heart be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and cares of this life, and that day come upon you suddenly like a trap. For it will come upon all who dwell on the face of the whole earth. But stay awake at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape all these things that are going to take place, and to stand before the Son of Man. And every day he was teaching in the temple, but at night he went out and lodged on the mount called Olivet. And early in the morning, all the people came to him in the temple to hear him.
Right. Interesting enough, by the way, uh, you know, Olivet's a mountain of olives, Mount of Olives.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we know what's at the Mount of Olives, Gethsemane.
Right.
So if you're ever there, interesting enough, and this is really cool. He either stayed in or walked through the Garden of Gethsemane to go where he lodged.
Oh, wow.
All the time. It's interesting, all the time.
Huh.
So it's just an interesting fact. But he
Oh,
says
that is
here,
interesting, right?
he says, when he mentions the day, he's talking about the beginning of the tribulation. That now you understand it's here. Here it is.
Mm-hmm.
The clock started. 7 weeks started. 7 years started. The 1 week of Daniel started, and I'm going to return. And interesting enough, when he talks about that, he said nobody knows the day.
Right.
He's not, interesting enough, talking about his return, because the day is the beginning of the tribulation. When we see that, we know 7 years later he's
Then
coming
the clock
back.
starts ticking. That
Seven
makes sense. I
seven
never
years
thought about that.
7 years later he's coming back. We'll
Right.
know exactly when that Antichrist stands in the in Israel and says, "I'm God and everybody needs to worship me." They call it the abomination of desolation.
Mm-hmm.
3.5 years later, we know what's happening. The Battle of Armageddon, and Christ is returning.
Yeah. So here's a question, if you don't mind me
Yeah,
asking. So we would know 7 years later that he would come back. We know, we definitely can tell what the 3.5 year mark would be,
yep,
assuming we're not raptured before.
yep,
Um, will we know when the 7 years has started?
yes. And here's what it'll be. Remember what has prompted it, the collapse.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Okay, so what starts it? The solution.
Okay. So the beginning of the one world government
So
and the
when
one world
when when
economy,
we
would
when
that be
we
it?
as a populace, and it's going to be around the world, is presented with, yeah, we know,
Mm-hmm.
it's awful, it's awful. Your government alone can't resolve this.
Right.
So, but what we are going to do, and this is, by the way, called the harlot.
Okay.
The harlot is the one that is manipulating everything, even today. They exist today,
Right.
and they're manipulating. And we'll get into this discussion of, literally, we kind of know who the harlot is,
Mm-hmm.
because interesting enough, they don't hide their agenda.
Right.
They've said it openly, publicly. Our agenda is one world government. Well, that's the harlot.
Right.
And they're going to succeed at some point in time. Now, by the way,
Hmm.
and this is why we always have to be careful about timing, the harlot has been around for centuries.
Right. I was going to say that could generationally that philosophy can continue on to the next people that pick up that banner,
That's right.
correct?
That's right. So
Yeah.
that we can't say, well, since they're brand new, then of course it's going to happen now. No, they've been around for centuries, and
Hmm.
and their stated objective. And we'll get into. You need to stay tuned, and we'll get
Hmm.
into the. I'll give you lots of information that's publicly known.
Okay.
I know who it is. Um, it's not fuzzy.
Right.
So it's going to be the one world government, and the only thing, in addition to the signs, and we've talked about this, that would tend to say we have now a higher probability that we are in this sequence, is
Hmm.
Israel returned as a nation.
Okay.
And remember, Jesus said, when you see the fig tree
Right.
return, that generation is going
That
to
pay
see it.
attention.
Pay
Right.
attention. That's going to end. So that's kind of one thing that does influence my understanding is uh, I do understand about. I've always understood about the nation of Israel.
Hmm.
And if they were not a nation today, personally, I'd still be teaching about it, but I wouldn't have the
The
same
urgency
I
wouldn't be
wouldn't have
there.
the same hump to it of, well, something has
Hmm.
happened that kind of says maybe this is it, you know. So
Right.
so that's it. But when you say when will we know when the tribulation starts, the answer is yes, because we agree, the populace agrees
Hmm.
to end our governmental systems.
Okay.
So no longer will you be the United States of America that is based on a constitution, that is based
Hmm.
upon electing a president and a Congress and senators and all of this. That will be basically abrogated, released, and given over to a one world government.
Hmm.
By the way, the same thing in France and Germany and Spain and China and
Right.
Russia.
Right.
All these things will be happening the same way. That and it'll be a new economic currency. So there won't be any dollar.
Right.
There won't be any pound. There won't be any euro. It'll be one new government or one new
Hmm.
economic. And
Right.
what we're seeing is this going to be what's called a Bitcoin or a digital currency,
Mm.
um, and it'll be electronic. It won't be paper, which means everything will have to be done by credit card and transactions over your banking system. Um, and now, interesting enough, and again, these are things that the average person isn't going to hear about because they don't say it, but because
Right.
I pay attention to this. Um, as you know, there's lots of Bitcoin
Right.
all over the place, and some do well, some don't do well, and it's all created by investors.
Hmm.
Well, when this happens, it's going to come out of the central banking system, and everything else, by the way, will be worth nothing, including dollars. You know, so if you have
Hmm.
dollars, unless you convert it over at the time that they do this beginning of the tribulation, you could have literally hundreds of thousands of dollars stuffed in your mattress, and literally
That could be
the
worthless.
next day it'll be worth nothing.
Hmm.
Linda and I were in our family. She's German, so we were over with her family doing a Christmas holiday. At the time, and this is year 2000, that they converted the Deutschmark to
Hmm.
euros. So on December 31st, you could spend Deutschmarks.
Right.
On January 1st, you couldn't
Hmm.
because they weren't acceptable. It had to now be euros. So
Right.
they gave everybody in Germany 60 days that you have to, if you have Deutschmarks, you have to convert them to euros. And at the end of the 60 days, if you haven't done it, it doesn't matter that you have them. They now are worth less.
Oh wow. So you couldn't. You couldn't even go to a bank at that point and then change them over.
For 60 days, you could.
Okay.
After the 60th day, and
That was it.
you showed up on the 61st day with, oh, I forgot, and I've got 100,000 Deutschmarks, they would say, too bad.
Yeah.
You lost your shot. It's worthless.
Interesting.
It's now worthless.
Okay.
So,
I didn't realize
so
that's
we're
how that
there.
transpired.
We're physically there, which we, by the way, we knew that on, because even the first over there's, a day. So we knew we had to convert.
Mm-hmm.
So we go to the bank. By the way, we're in a long line. Because we can't spend our Deutschmarks. We have to convert them to euros.
Right.
So we're in this long line, and I'm behind this lady. She's got these big sacks of money.
Wow.
And she's ahead of me, so I observe all this. So she comes, and she dumps 280,000 Deutschmarks on the counter, and they have to count them all out, run the conversion, and she literally had them. We say in her mattress. She kind of had them in her bed. I asked her, "Where did you have all this stuff?" Well, I had them in my bedroom under my mattress.
Wow.
And I didn't want to risk the 60 days. So she's there day one, and converting the money. So when the tribulation happens, it's going to be a digital currency and it'll be issued by the central banks. Well, a month ago, 4 weeks ago, they floated for the first time a digital currency from UAE in Middle East. The central bank came up with their own digital currency and said, we're going to function that way. And what they're doing is testing it
On a smaller scale.
How does it work? How do people react to it? How do we convert over? They're not saying that it's the currency or the end of it, but it's just this. And what was different about it was this: it was issued by the central bank.
Okay.
So everything else in their country that they were trying to invest in became basically meaningless, because now it's, well, this is it. If you're going to have to deal with the central banking of the digital currency, and they're testing it out. And you can hear again, even the Fed, what's called the Federal Reserve, and what they do is they put out information to float things ahead of time. So the Federal Reserve in America has talked about, we're looking at moving from the dollar to a digital currency. They haven't done it, and there's no movement at the moment of we're gonna do this in a month or 2 months. But they've made statements about it, which is what I observe, is that they kind of float things out there, get people talking about it a little bit, processing it, see how they react, and then they decide what to do with it next. So, but that's already started. The conversation, anyway, has started, and the way they they actually did it in the UAE, because of I know that they came out at an extremely low value, which is going to grow. Well, I looked at that and said, man, what a great investment. If I invested in this, I know I'm going to do really well. So, so I tried, but I was prevented that I'm not a citizen of UAE, and because I'm not a citizen, because I had a system where I'm going down, who are you, what are you doing, how much you want to invest, et cetera, and then there's a question. What country are you a citizen of?
Ah, interesting.
I put in the United States. Immediately it comes on, you are not, you can go no further, you are not allowed to make this investment, and that's the end of it. I couldn't go any further with it. So it was really interesting. And by the way, the value's gone up, and I would have made decent money with it if I could have owned it. I couldn't do it.
You could have done it.
But it was interesting to me that they floated it as a central bank. Again, as we've kind of talked about, a sign. Pay attention.
Right.
Does that mean more? Are we going to see more of that? Are we going to, what's going to happen? So that when the tribulation starts, it'll be the nations and then we as citizens agreeing to a one world government and a brand new economic system. I believe, by the way, and we'll talk about this, but I believe it will eliminate ownership. And it'll say everything is owned by the government. We will allow you, and I think at the same time, they'll release and forgive all the debt everywhere of everybody. So that if you have a mortgage on your house,
that'll be part of their solution.
It'll be part of the solution.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, we forgive that. You don't have. We're going to transfer all the ownership to us, not to you. You can't go down the deeds that you have and all that don't mean anything. We'll let you stay in your house, basically rent-free, mortgage-free, so you won't have to worry about cost. You can stay there, and then we'll provide you a income. And I do believe there will be it won't be what I would call pure communism. Pure communism, which by the way never has existed.
Right.
Is everybody gets the same. Every place, everywhere, including the leaders. Well, by the way, the leaders of the communists
would never have that, right?
never took the same. They always had different, and even socialist systems had to deal with a variety of differences. So I don't believe everybody's going to get the same. I think what they'll do is transfer in some way. So if your house is let's say $500,000 and the guy next to you is $100,000, you both won't own it, but they'll give you what I call an electronic credit into the new system, which I believe will be kind of a corporate type structure, like a stock type situation. It won't be an exchange that you could say, great, I'm going to transfer me to $500,000 worth of stock, and then tomorrow I'm going to go sell it. Well, they'll transfer you to that stock, but you can't sell it because there's not going to be an exchange for it. It'll be determined by the system. And basically, and that's why it's a what's called a phantom wealth. And everybody on paper looks like they're getting better and better and better. They can't actually sell it. So it's really just a calculation but you start with more than the person next to you.
Right.
Because, well, there's an equation of that. And then I believe they will have, management and people supervising, etc. They'll still keep a hierarchy of the amount of money you make, so that everybody gets X to start with. And then if you're doing this or doing this or doing this, and they might, by the way, value researchers. Gee, if you're a researcher or you're a educator, we're going to pay you X, and it's not going to be related to the economics of the company. It'll be what they've decided as, if you do this, we're going to reward you for doing that, and you'll make more of the currency, which means you can then go, and they'll be buying. Yeah. It says there's going to be buying and selling, so there's still stuff being bought and sold. So when that happens, it's a known. I believe it'll be a known day. It'll be June the 15th. We've all agreed. The world's agreed. We're gonna convert over, and this is what's going to happen, and this is how it's going to start.
And that will be the beginning of the 7 years.
It's going to be what I experienced in Germany. One day it was this way, and literally the next day it was different, and you couldn't spend those Deutschmarks anymore.
Right.
It was, and that's what's going to happen. It'll be that day. There it is. Okay, now on top of that, and we're going to get into this, is the mark of the beast. The beast is the new system.
Okay.
By the way, it's not the mark of the Antichrist. A lot of people get that confused. It's the mark of the beast.
Okay.
It's the mark of the system, and it's economic in nature. And interesting enough, it'll look like what we're starting to see already called a vaccine passport,
Right.
electronic. And you'll have to have
Something that is required to be able to
required
make
to be
transactions and that
able to
sort of
get on an
thing.
airplane or to go. You got to demonstrate, which will be on your iPhone. And here's and this is a Richard Case interpretation, so this isn't biblical at all. But um, John talks
Mhm.
about the mark being on the forehead.
Mhm.
That's biblical.
Right.
Everybody, what is that? What is that? What is that? Here's my interpretation. Um, right now, when you get on your phone, what do?
You look at it.
Because it's facial recognition.
Mhm.
By the way, under the guise of increased security, which it is, but it
Mhm.
also is developing. It's getting better and better and better, the facial recognition,
Right.
uh, so that I believe the mark is you,
Hmm.
and that is that um, there is a electronic registration
Mhm.
that I joined it willingly. So like when you're setting up a phone, they
Right.
say hold it there and let it take a picture, and it does all that. Remember, it does all that stuff to
Right.
get it in. You can see it happening. Got it. You're going to have to say, I agree to join this system. Here's my picture.
Right.
It does it, and now you have data. And who are you? Where are you? What's your social security number? Whatever they use. Um, and I've agreed.
Right.
I'm in the system. When you go to any place, they're gonna hold up their device to you. Are
Mm.
you registered? If you're registered, you can proceed.
And so the
If you're not,
technology is in place.
the
Is what
technology,
one of the things you're talking
yeah,
about here.
which is again, there's more to this. This is why I don't think, if I had to say, is it going to happen, the next month, 2 or 3? I don't think so.
Mhm.
Uh, Technology isn't there, and by the way, it's all being worked on, but
Right.
it's not quite there yet. Because think about your local restaurant or your local
Mhm.
store. They have to have the receiving dock device to
Mhm.
be able to do that. Well, even right now they don't have it.
Right.
That's not set up. Well, that's going to have to be set up. If they're going to control it, they literally have to control it, and it'll have to be
Mhm.
absolute. So when I think that John said it's on your forehead, I think he saw them put it up to your head, and they
Mhm.
said, well, that's the mark.
Right.
So I think it's
Oh,
going to.
that's
I
interesting.
think it's
That's
going
an
to.
interesting theory.
I
Yeah.
think it's going to be electronic of some kind, and certainly phone based. Um, well, you're going to have to take that mark.
Mhm.
There'll be and we'll talk about this, and this is why I believe we're supposed to pay attention. We
Mhm.
have to learn now to be the remnant,
Mhm.
because the remnant doesn't take the mark.
Right. And it's
And
going to have to find a way to function in society without it.
right, and they've got to be able to be in community and know how to operate without this joining the system. Because in our view of it, if I'm part of the remnant, I'm recognizing, understanding. Yeah, I'm not going to participate in that wealth building,
Mhm.
and I'm going to suffer for that.
Right.
Okay, um, but I'm willing to, because it's very, very clear in
Right.
Scripture. Don't take the mark. Do
Right.
not take the mark. Yes, there'll be a consequence, but I'll get you through it,
Right.
and I got to guide you.
And
And
there's bigger stakes going
right,
on.
so we have a series, that we're on our other podcast of discerning God's will. Um, it's all critical to understand God's will, because we're gonna have to know.
Mhm.
Okay, there it is. Don't do it, and I'll guide you and lead you through it, because he says he protects us. Now, by the way, some people get martyred.
Right.
But even in that, I believe, and we can talk about that even with Stephen, yes, he got martyred, but he, interesting enough, was protected. I believe, from what I can read in Scripture, he actually didn't feel any pain at all. And he was ordained by God to be martyred, but God took care of it. So when the end comes, and the end is the beginning of the tribulation, kicking off the week, kicking off the 7 years. Yep, we're going to know it. And there's going to be choices we have to make and understanding we have to have. And one of which is, don't take that mark.
Right.
And don't put yourself in that position because you think, well, why not? I might as well. And so what? Well, we're going to find out. There's a so what.
Yes.
And it really matters. So we'll talk about that. So it's been a interesting thing, and as Luke says here, is he says two things: pay attention, don't operate as if it's not going to happen, don't be caught unaware that all of a sudden it happened and you never learned anything about how to prepare for that, how to follow God, how to be led by God, and at the same time, don't stop doing life.
Right.
So don't just say, okay, well, then I'll just hide in and sell everything and that'll be it. Well, no. Live your life out. God will guide you. But he says, are you understanding? And don't be foolish to say it'll never happen.
Right.
He said it's going to happen and it's going to matter to you. And don't let the cares of the world drive you to, well, I'm only going to do that, and I don't care spiritually what God says. He says care. You need to care and pay attention and listen to what I'm going to show you. That's why he kind of adds that. And by the way, this is after a discussion about the return of Israel and all this stuff. Is pay attention and be alert and don't get lazy. That's a really interesting statement that he makes.
Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff. I love what we're getting into. I think this is going to be interesting for everyone. And honestly, I know Monday is not our End Times Friday conversation, but what you have already talked about that we're going to tee up on Monday's conversation, I think is going to actually piggyback on this conversation very well.
It really is.
In terms of discerning God's will and how we navigate specific things that are coming down the pike. So
I and
we're
going to talk,
remind everybody to tune in on that one.
The context of, and this is next Monday, we're going to talk about there's movement of requiring people to operate by having a vaccine, and if you have the vaccine, you could travel, you can go to the store, go to the restaurant. If you don't, you're gonna have to stay at home. So that's a precursor to what the one world government is going to look like. Well, it's pretty tricky, and the question comes up of, okay, what has God told me to do? How do I respond to that? And then what do I help other people understand?
Right.
So we're going to use that example, which is real. How do we seek God's will about this and process it? And it starts with, as we've discussed, logos. We're going to go to logos. Okay, what does this say? Understand it. And then we individually will have to say, now that I see that, Father, what would you say to me about how to play this out? And here's the import of it as we're talking today on the End Times Friday. Regardless of whether we're in the end or not, we are in a period of time where there's forces working on a global basis against us, and our life is not going to be the same as we thought we have been used to for decades. It's changing, maybe as a movement into the end, or maybe just a deep time of adversity and chaos. Regardless, we have to understand what it means to follow God, because he's the only one that can lead us through it, and he's calling us to that. So that's why it's so critical. I hope you stay with us during this end time. So we're going to keep talking about that. But also Monday is a specific thing we're going to talk about. So you may want to come back and listen to that. Invite people to hear it because it's going to be
Right.
really critical for it. So we'll pick it up next Monday, and then again a week from Friday we'll keep going on the signs and what it means to us.
Great. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.
We'll see you then. Enjoy it. See you, Kathy.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.